to compete against them. But third and most critical advantage that China has over the United States in this field is that their government recognized the importance of these critical minerals a long time ago and was willing to put generous government subsidies in place to launch their industry, while somehow we were lulled into complacency and failed to realize our dependence on China and their processing of critical minerals and rare earth elements. Now, people may be asking, why do we care about critical minerals and rare earth elements? Well, the truth is, these elements are essential to producing magnets and other components of our vehicles, our robotics, our aerospace, and our defense systems. We can't build our weapons systems to defend our nation and to deter aggressors without access to these processed rare earth elements and critical minerals. That's how important it is. But China has been successful in sidelining the United States and other global competitors, becoming effectively the only game in town, or I should say, in the world, when it comes to mining and processing these minerals. Well, whether we realized it or not, there's hardly an aspect of our daily life that would not be affected were China to cut off our access to these processed rare earth elements and critical minerals. From our iPhones to the cars we drive, even our washing machines. Because China recognized how important these minerals are, their government is willing to take extraordinary measures to make sure that they control the supply chain for these critical minerals in the future. What are these extraordinary measures that they've taken? Well, over the last 20 years, China has invested $57 billion through state-backed financial institutions in the forms of loans to Belt and Road participant countries in order to gain leverage over the global supply chain for these critical minerals. More than 75% of these investments are structured through joint ventures and special purpose vehicles in such a way that Chinese entities have ownership stakes, allowing them to influence the extraction and processing of these critical mineral projects. More forebodingly, last December, China took steps to ban exports of technologies used in mining and processing rare earth elements in order to exert further control over the supply chain and enhance its leverage when dealing with the United States in various binational negotiations. In April of this year, China placed export controls on 7 rare earth elements, requiring any company that wishes to export them to acquire a special license. And if they didn't, obviously it would be illegal. While the terms and conditions of the licensing process are still being spelled out in more detail, this may become the tool to incentivize various countries to act in China's interest to protect their own access to these minerals. In other words, it's not just the United States that depends on these rare earth elements and critical minerals. It's virtually every other part of the global community. And when China sees likely competitors, it floods the market with excess supply of these minerals, lowering the market price and thereby sidelining any potential competitors. Now, just to be clear, rare earth elements and critical minerals can be mined in many places across the globe. Where China has gotten the monopoly or virtual monopoly is 90% of them are processed in China. So you may mine rare earth elements or critical minerals in Chile or in the United States or Australia or somewhere else, but 90% of them must be processed in China because they're not other competitors for the reasons that I've mentioned. Because China will stop at nothing to manipulate the market, prices have dropped dramatically when they flood the market with processed minerals. Since 2023, for example, cobalt prices decreased 59.5% from $82,000 per ton to $33,000 per ton. Again, because China is manipulating the market to discourage any competition. Nickel prices decreased by 73.1% from $48,000 per ton to $13 per ton. And lithium prices decreased 86.8% from $68,000 to less than $10,000. Consequently, several plants that were designed to open up in the United States to compete with China have had to close because of their inability to maintain profitability in this economic environment. The United States' only cobalt mine opened in 2023 and was forced to close less than a year later when nickel plants in Australia and New Caledonia shut down in the same time frame. And while these competitors have closed their doors, Chinese firms have continued to hold on to their state-sponsored monopoly. China has been taking these steps for decades, right beneath our nose, to develop this near monopoly that they currently hold on mining and processing of critical elements. As the United States, we should have seen this coming, and we could have done something about it, but we didn't. Joe Biden could have spent the last 4 years in the White House tackling this issue head on, but here we are with virtually nothing to show for the Biden administration's so-called efforts. So we're playing catch-up with the Chinese Communist Party, which is not a good place to be. If another pandemic were to happen, disrupting global supply chains, or if we were to find ourselves in a hot war with China, or even difficult trade negotiations with China, which we will, and they decided to cut off trade with the United States, there would be drastic consequences to our economy, to our military preparedness, and to our ability to deter an aggressive Chinese Communist Party. Americans would not be able to purchase the electronics that power our lives day in and day out. Our Department of Defense, or Department of War as it's now called, would be hamstrung in its ability to obtain critical components for the weapon systems that are used to deter aggression by our adversaries. And elderly or chronically ill Americans would be unable to obtain the pharmaceutical remedies they rely upon to simply stay alive. Well, fortunately, while we're late to the game, things are moving now in a better direction under unified Republican control. In March of this year, for example, President Trump issued an executive order directing the Departments of Interior, Defense, or now as it's called, War, Agriculture, and Energy to work together to accelerate domestic investment and production of critical minerals. And Congress also did some things in the One Big Beautiful Bill to help. That legislation included an allocation of $2 billion to the Secretary of War to increase U.S. critical mineral stockpile through the National Defense Stockpile Transaction Fund. And an additional $5 billion was provided for investments in critical minerals through the Industrial Base Fund. Furthermore, this law tightened our definitions of foreign entity of concerns, which will help ensure that Chinese critical mineral companies are not availing themselves of the U.S. tax credits in order to invest in their own critical mineral efforts. While there are ongoing discussions to ensure that the defense authorization bill that we are currently on includes provisions such as the reauthorization of the Development Finance Corporation that our colleagues, Senators Risch and Shaheen, have sponsored this year, we need to make sure they're successful in those efforts. The Development Finance Corporation works to incentivize private capital markets to invest in our most critical supply chains. I've introduced something called the Critical Mineral Security Act, which directs the Department of Interior and Department of State to further identify vulnerabilities in U.S. supply chains for critical minerals. Now, I believe these are important steps, but Mr. President, we have a bigger problem in America. We simply have a hard time building things anymore. A lot of that has to do with overregulation, problems with gaining the appropriate permits, and the litigation environment, which means that any sort of critical infrastructure is probably going to be delayed years, maybe decades, from endless lawsuits. That is a larger, more threatening situation, and I'm only talking about a small part of it here today. The steps we've taken so far are, unfortunately, too little, too late, in my view, but they are at least a step in the right direction. They're not enough by themselves to ensure that we have safe and secure supply chains for both mining and processing of critical minerals to meet our nation's needs. But once again, Deng Xiaoping, who said, "Hide your motives and bide your time," has successfully snookered the United States and our other allies around the world so that we are now almost entirely dependent on Chinese processing of critical minerals. So there's not a day to wait. We need to make sure that we catch up, and we catch up quickly. It's going to take a lot of work for the United States to claw our way back to where we need to be. But I'm confident that we can if we rise to meet the occasion. So I would urge all of my colleagues to listen to and respond to this alarm bell that I'm trying to ring here on the Senate floor today, and take seriously the urgency of securing our supply chains and securing American processing facilities for critical minerals. We simply do not have a choice. Otherwise, we will continue to be held hostage by an adversary that does not wish us well. They don't want friendly competition, they want dominance. And they also want to take Taiwan in the coming years. If we can't build things because we can't deter them by building the weapons necessary to do that, if we can't sustain our economy by continuing to manufacture technology that allows us to compete with China in the coming years, we will have failed in our fundamental responsibility as members of Congress. If America is to have a safe, secure, and prosperous future, we have to compete and we have to win the critical minerals race with the People's Republic of China. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the previously scheduled recess begin immediately.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
this week. Look at this poster. This one here.
Verb, an illegal immigrant? That's because they have to resort to outright lies to defend their truly god-awful health care policies. Their attacks on health care are already hurting American citizens, millions of them. There is no getting around it. Cutting health care by more than $1 trillion, hospitals are already laying off staff and closing down across the country. Millions are going to soon be kicked off of their health care. So Donald Trump can lie, J.D. Vance can lie, but people are still going to get those letters in the mail telling them how much more their health insurance will cost next year. Now, apparently, when President Trump was looking over Democratic health care proposals, he said, and I quote, "Go F yourself." That tells you how much Donald Trump cares about whether families go bankrupt paying for their health care. Premiums on the marketplace are set to more than double. Washington State had an uninsured rate of 15% before the Affordable Care Act. Now, because of that, it is down to 5%. People now, though, are going to lose their health insurance because of Trump and Republicans. They're going to put off their care. Many will get sicker, and some will even die. That is the reality. That is why we're here fighting for health care. I'll be voting no on the partisan Republican-only funding bill that already didn't pass a few weeks ago. I'll be voting yes on the Democratic bill that not only funds government, but also addresses this GOP healthcare crisis and protects Congress's power of the purse. I am ready to keep the government open. As I have said over the last 2 weeks, I am ready. I am willing to stay at the table for as long as it takes. But the question remains, will the Republican leadership get serious and negotiate?
Thank you, Patty. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, and to my colleagues. So yesterday, after weeks of waiting to see if the president would lead Senator Schumer and Leader Jeffrey go over to the White House, this is not a joke. People are literally standing on a healthcare cliff right now. For members of our caucus, when the Republicans, a whole bunch of them, didn't show up and vote last week, what did our people do? We went out and we met with the people in our state. We met with doctors and nurses. We went to rural hospitals. We talked to people that can barely hold on right now. This, what one farmer called a perfect storm of ugly. The tariffs are hitting them, the markets are drying up, and now they have their health care costs. So many of them, especially in rural areas, are on these individual plans. So what does the president do after this meeting? He posts that deep fake offensive video. This isn't a joke. This isn't political theater. He's so proud of the art of the deal, and it is his time to lead. He has said repeatedly, and you've all seen the real videos, where he said this is a time for a president to lead in the past. Well, this is his time to lead. When we talk to the people out there that aren't the ones on the Mar-a-Lago golf course, you hear what's really happening. They look at those grocery bills. They look at their electricity bills. Those things aren't deep fakes. Those things don't lie. Those things are real. So what are they facing? Healthcare cliff. 20 million Americans are set to see their premiums double when they pick a plan starting November 1st. And for those of you that ask, why are you doing this now? This isn't a December thing. This isn't a January thing. This is a now thing. This is happening right now. And the only way to fix this is to do something about it now. Those families that don't know if they're going to have cancer research, and those researchers on Alzheimer's that are looking at going to other countries and looking at what's happening with NIH, this is a now thing. So I hope people remember that this is not a funny deep fake meme. This is not anything he says. And for those people in my state that voted for me and him, and there's a lot of them, they actually thought he'd bring costs down. That's what he said would happen on day one. Well, it is day 253. And people are paying more for their prescription drugs. They're paying more for their beef. They're paying more for their groceries, and they're paying more for their electricity, and they're sure paying more for their health care premiums. This is his moment to lead.
I'm struck by the extent to which sort of DC brain has infected us all, where we think that this is some sort of cooked up demand. The reason that we are trying to take action now on health care is because people's premiums are going up this coming week by letter. I got a text from a buddy of mine in my fantasy football league, but it was not a trash talking text. He got a letter, 40% increase for his father's premiums. This is not a talking point. This is not an allegation. This is literally what's happening. And 40%, you should be lucky if it's a 40% increase. The average increase is going to be 114%. And so the time to solve this problem is now. Open enrollment is now. Letters are going out now. Now, some insurance companies are sending out letters saying, your rates are increasing, but we're not sure by how much. And some insurance companies are being jawboned into not even sending letters at all. Now, there is only one thing worse than your rates going up on January 1. It is not being told until December that your rates are going up on January 1. People are going to lose their health care. This is not a joke. This is not a political talking point. This is what's going to happen across the country. The idea that this is some Democratic priority or independent priority or Republican priority is nonsense. Tens of millions of people are specifically going to see a 114% increase, and everybody else is in the same risk pool. And so all we're saying is, look, if we were... This is a very damaging issue for Republicans. And if we were terribly cynical, we would just let them stew in it. But we want to solve it because we care in our bones about the people we represent. And so there is still an opportunity to do something about this. There is still an opportunity to do something about this. None of us like shutdowns. But the only way to avoid a shutdown is to sit down between the political parties, and that includes the party out of power, and to make a deal. There's still time.
Start off with Buffalo.
All right.
From the Bills.
Right. Thank you, Senator.
He's from Buffalo, you know.
Yes, I am. At this point, it seems like a shutdown is inevitable. When you get to that point, what's the plan to get out?
Look, first, it's right now in the Republicans' court. We said this to Trump yesterday. He can easily call up Thune and Johnson and say, just add the two parts we want added to the bill. They can take it out of our bill, put it in theirs, and solve it. So it's in their court. And let me just say, the American people are learning how bad this health care crisis is, and they will put tremendous heat on Republicans to solve it. Yes?
Leader Thune just said that there are going to be no negotiations with Democrats if the government is shut down. So how long are Democrats willing to stomach the shutdown? Days,
Look,
weeks,
it's
months?
in their court to solve it. It's their shutdown. And as I said, they are going to face tremendous pressure from the American people. Trump in the room admitted, I said to him, this is going to be very bad for you, these increases in the health care. And it's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for America or anybody. And he admitted that. So I think we believe that this is an issue worth fighting for. We hope the Republicans avoid the shutdown. But if they do it, it's because they didn't even negotiate with us till the last minute. Yes.
The president is now threatening these irreversible cuts to the workforce, to programs. Is that a risk that Democrats are willing to take?
The bottom line is he's doing it anyway. They've already cut 300,000 people. Whether there's a shutdown or not, it'll be up to Trump whether he's going to let Musk, formerly Doge, vote, do these cuts. do these layoffs and do these firings. It will fall on him, as I said. He's the one doing the firings, not Democrats. And that's what it shows. Yes. No, right here.
Senator Schumer, Times poll out this morning, 2% of Americans rank healthcare as the #1 problem facing the country, which is to say, a very small percentage. How do you think about that disconnect between the language you all are using? This is
It's not what it's. I don't know what the poll numbers were, because the. Yes, without question. Wherever we go, wherever we talk about it, it has our back on this issue, and it shows that who do you trust much more? Who do you trust more to deal with the health care crisis? They trust Democrats. And one final thing. They're going to start getting these notices tomorrow. A lot of people don't know it. But once they start getting these notices, and there's these huge, staggering increases, you know, we thought it was $400 per family on ACA and somewhat more, somewhat less for people not on ACA. Now it's more. It's 114%. They're going to be staggered, and they're going to say, what's happening? And we're going to be right there explaining to them it's because the Republicans wouldn't negotiate with us. We're ready to do it any time, and there'll be huge heat on them on this issue. No, last one. This gentleman had to call on someone from this side, the left side.
Over the last decade and a half, in instances when Republicans have shut down the government over one issue or another, order ACA funding, they did not get the policies that they were requesting. What makes you think this will be different for Democrats?
Because the health care crisis that they created, in part because we asked them 3 times to vote on extending the ACA, and they voted no 3 times. And we believe that this issue is a real issue for the American people. We also believe that when there's a a Republican president, a Republican Senate, a Republican House, the natural inclination is to blame the Republicans. That's what the polling data shows. Who do you know? A neutral question. Who do you blame, Democrats or Republicans? It's like +20. They'd blame the Republicans. And we also believe the fact that they wouldn't negotiate with us, which became clearer last week when Trump said yes and Trump said no. The American people don't like that. So we think we're on our front foot as we go into this fight. Thank you, everybody.
And congratulate him on his new grandchild.
In the middle of the caucus, my phone rang, and it was my wife. We have a beautiful little boy, name yet not told to us by our daughter and daughter-in-law.
Congrats.
Here.
Verb, an illegal immigrant? That's because they have to resort to outright lies to defend their truly god-awful health care policies. Their attacks on health care are already hurting American citizens, millions of them. There is no getting around it.
The minority whip?
Are we on a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we're just hours away from a deadline to fund the federal government. This task of funding our government is one of the most important responsibilities vested in Congress. This is not my first rodeo. I've been through shutdowns before. The last one, and one of the longest, was in President Trump's first term. So here in his second term comes another government shutdown, just 9 months into his presidency. Accomplishing this funding of our government requires bipartisan compromise. Do the math. To pass anything of substance in the United States Senate, you need 60 votes. There are 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. You need at least 7 Democratic votes to join all the Republicans if you want to have a bipartisan roll call that passes. So that would suggest to any president and any member of the majority party that it's a good idea to sit down with the senators from the other side of the aisle before you reach the shutdown phase of this conversation. If we fail to fund this government, farmers won't receive their payments and loans they need to stay afloat, facing President Trump's tariffs. Medical breakthroughs and research will be put on hold. American service members and thousands of federal employees across the country will be forced to work without pay. But unfortunately, we've seen little interest on the other side to sit down and talk about it and to reach a compromise. The Republicans control the White House, they control the Senate, they control the House of Representatives, and they've decided the best approach is don't negotiate with the Democrats. Give them a take it or leave it, and let's see what happens. Despite knowing since March that government funding was going to run out tonight, President Donald Trump waited until yesterday to meet with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. What was he waiting for? He understands the president bears major responsibility if a shutdown takes place. Think about it. He waited until a day before the government funding deadline to finally sit down and talk to both political parties. The Republican Majority Leader Thune said he's committed to passing appropriation bills through regular order. I agree. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I think we're doing a pretty good job and we can do better. We also want to pass government spending bills, but we refuse to rubber stamp President Trump's harmful cuts and reckless actions. Yet, instead of being here to do the work of funding our government, Republicans in the House are gone. They left Washington last week and don't plan to return till next week. That doesn't help at all. The House must stop playing political games and come to work so we can actually avoid this shutdown. Republicans must take responsibility for the government they control. Government they control. White House Republicans are on vacation. Their refusal to prevent a shutdown will ruin millions of American travel plans. During a shutdown, air traffic controllers and TSA employees work without pay. That's not reassuring. This means delays and longer wait times for travelers at airports across the country. Just like the last time that President Donald Trump shut down the government in 2018 for 35 long days. It took pressure from the air traffic controllers to finally end that Trump shutdown. And our aviation system will continue to bear the effects because the shutdown would pause hiring and training programs for air traffic controllers at a time when we should be improving safety. Does it make you feel more confident to take a flight and realize that that air traffic controller, if they're at work, is working without pay? Or that the testing and training of the air traffic controllers has been delayed because of a shutdown? So the next time you're sitting in an airport and you see your flight delayed, you can thank those who didn't want to sit down and talk before the shutdown faces. Unfortunately, the Trump administration is preparing to weaponize the shutdown and continue their attacks on the federal workforce. Without any rhyme or reason, they have been chopping off thousands and thousands of federal employees. Sometimes the employees are doing essential work and they beg them to come back to work. Some do, some don't. Last week, the director of the OMB, Russell Vought, sent out a memo stating that any government employee who sees seeks funding for their role labs because of a shutdown would be fired if their work does not align with the president's objectives. They're promising a big shutdown of the federal workforce. These firings jeopardize progress at federal agencies already indiscriminately gutted by the Trump administration. The Trump administration has begged fired employees to return to work at agencies like the National Weather Service and Department of Energy. Even Republican senators, some, agree government employees are not pawns to be played during the debate on government funding. These employees and their families deserve a better boss. But the Trump administration apparently doesn't care. They're content to cause continual chaos across the government to score cheap points. The American people know who's making the government work and who's trying to destroy it. For months, Democrats have been ready and willing to work with Republicans to avoid the awful effects of a shutdown. Why should the average American care about a shutdown? What import does it have to you and your life and your family? It's basic. It's health care. That's what this is about on the Democratic side. We think this is a battle worth fighting. We face the prospect of some 24 million Americans either losing their health insurance in the next several weeks or seeing dramatic increases in their premium payment. Some will have to get a different insurance policy with higher deductibles. Some won't be able to afford health insurance at all. And take a look at what the cutback in Medicaid is going to do to hospitals across our country. Illinois is a great state, very diverse. Beautiful big city of Chicago and a lot of smaller rural area towns as well. These rural areas count on hospitals like no other place in our state. They are literally the lifeline. And if these hospitals start to close, it not only presents a hardship when it comes to medical care, it hurts the economy of the region. Imagine trying to keep or attract a company to bring their business to your town when you just lost your hospital. This cutback in the big, beautiful budget bill of the Trump administration of paying into Medicaid is exactly the wrong thing to do for my home state of Illinois and for most other states. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We want to stop this cutback in health care quality and availability across this country. That's what we're holding out for. It isn't some big, beautiful border wall. It's what American families have to pay for health insurance each month. You ought to see the numbers if we don't do anything. The so-called ACA tax credits means that there's a helping hand for families in income situations where they're eligible to pay for health insurance. The Republicans eliminated this helping hand, and now the premiums are going to go up. We've already received notice in Illinois of several insurance companies that have gone out of business. It's a problem, a real serious problem in terms of the cost of premiums for families. So that's what this is about. Bringing down the government is not a good policy by and large, but neither is cutting health care for 25 million Americans. So that's what we're bringing this issue together on. Can we have a sit down with Democrats and Republicans and reach an agreement? Yes, we can. We can start tonight. There's no reason why we shouldn't. So I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will understand that uninsured Americans and Americans with health insurance that they can't afford is serious hardship for working families. Mr. President, I hope my Republican colleagues will join us in a bipartisan conversation. It's long overdue. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise to discuss a vote that the Senate will take later this week on a block of executive nominations. The vote will likely come either tomorrow or possibly Friday, and there's a block of approximately 100 nominations that we will be considering. And I rise to talk about the nomination of one individual, Bill White, to be the United States ambassador to Belgium. I regret that we are taking up nominations in block. I think there are good reasons to reform the nominations process. I think we probably have to have Senate confirmation for too many people. But I didn't believe a few weeks ago in the Senate action that allowed people to be lumped together, because my view was that causes individuals who are in the bloc not to get the appropriate scrutiny that they should get. I viewed the action bluntly as a little less about advancing nominations as raising the risk of hiding nominations in large groups where individuals would not get appropriate scrutiny. And I believe that very strongly to be the case of Mr. White. Mr. White is President Trump's nominee to be ambassador to an important U.S. ally, Belgium, the headquarters of NATO. And Mr. White has done some good things in his life, and I don't dispute that. And I know he's been a strong supporter of President Trump, as are virtually all of the Trump appointees, many of whom I have voted for. I haven't done this calculation, but I probably have a track record of, on the Democratic side, of voting for as high a percentage of President Trump's nominees, both in term one and term two, as just about anyone, because I do believe, as a former governor, that your election does carry with it a mandate to be able to assemble a team of like-minded people. And even if I might disagree with you, President Trump was elected and should have the ability to assemble a team of like-minded people. But I do carefully scrutinize the character, judgment, and qualifications of the individuals who are put before us for important positions. And this nomination of this individual for this country at this time I view as so uniquely bad that I wanted to take the time to come to the floor and talk about why. And what I'm going to talk about is Mr. White's judgment, as evidenced by his social media postings. And I have a whole lot of examples I could use, but I'm going to just narrow it down to ones that I think are a true window into this individual's judgment and character, and demonstrates that he's not suitable to represent the United States in a critical ambassadorial position. On May 16, 2023, he tweeted out about one of our colleagues, Senator Graham of South Carolina. Graham is a snake. He's tweeted out many bad things about Democratic colleagues that I'm not going to post before you, but someone who says about Lindsey Graham that he is a snake is not demonstrating the judgment that you need to be an ambassador representing the United States in Belgium. Mr. White fell down the rabbit hole of election conspiracy in 2020 and has repeatedly tweeted and posted his belief that the 2020 election was not accurately called and that Donald Trump actually won rather than President Biden. Now, I think any intelligent person recognizes that as a conspiracy theory that most fourth graders wouldn't be gullible enough to fall for. But Mr. White has tweeted it over and over and over again, and he's gone beyond just asserting that Donald Trump won the election in 2020. He's actually gone much, much farther than that. In the run-up to the election of 2024, so this is now 4 years after the 2020 election, Mr. White was posting material, reposting material about Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, claiming that he had acted improperly in the 2020 election, locked Georgia Secretary of State, and forgive me, this is a quote, "lock this mother effer up." That is what he is calling to happen to the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia. And this was recent. This is in August of 2024. This is not years and years and years ago. Mr. White went on to continue in this extreme rhetoric in the aftermath of President Trump's election in 2024. Within the days to follow, shortly after the election, he basically says Donald Trump won Georgia. That's referring to the 2024 election. And then it's high time now to legitimately prosecute the Georgia Secretary of State and Governor Kemp, the Republican governor of Georgia, Mr. White, is calling for them both to be prosecuted, and this was just at the time that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. Okay, Donald Trump has been elected president in 2024. Why are you still so focused on a campaign of retribution against Georgia Republicans that you are urging to be locked up and prosecuted? To be an ambassador, you need to have some judgment. You need to have some diplomacy. You will deal with tough issues. Belgium is not a big country, but Belgium is a very important country. It's been a U.S. ally for a very long time, and it's the headquarters of NATO, which has huge importance in the world right now. And putting somebody into a position like this who puts out negative tweets about Lindsey Graham and who is encouraging Republican officials in Georgia to be prosecuted and locked up, I think those would be disqualifying in and of themselves. But as I was looking at this individual social media account, I came upon something else that a lot of people didn't notice because it seemed odd, but I did a little bit of research into it, and I want to focus on it. Mr. White, in May of 2024, months before President Trump's election, retweeted a post from an individual named Dries Van Langenhove with a video from this individual. And the video is a lengthy video where this individual, Dries Van Langenhove, says, "This Friday they may send me to prison for years, so this video is my last chance. They are trying to destroy me, but with your help we will destroy them. Free Dries." Among the other tweets calling a colleague a snake and calling for people to be locked up, this one seemed odd. Who's Dries Van Langenhove? Who's Dries Van Langenhove? Dries Van Langenhove is a convicted, Holocaust-denying, pro-violence anti-Semite in Belgium. And the tweet that Mr. White posted was his video the night before he was sentenced to a year in prison for inciting violence and denying the Holocaust. This is an article from Politico Europe in March of 2024, and it talks about Mr. Van Langenhove. Title: Belgium's far-right prodigy gets prison term for inciting violence. Dries Van Langenhove, a political activist and leader of a Flemish nationalist youth movement called Shutdown, was convicted of inciting violence and denying the Holocaust, the Ghent criminal court ruled. He reveled in Nazi ideas that caused much suffering. He wants to undermine society, a judge said when announcing the ruling. Why would Mr. White, in March of 2024, even know who Dries Van Langenhove was? When I saw this, as I was researching this prior to the hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I had no idea who Dries Van Langenhove was, and I wondered, why is Mr. White platforming this individual I know nothing about? And then as I read it, I find that he is a notorious violence-promoting, Holocaust-denying, anti-Semite criminal convict in Belgium. This is a big deal. The ADL says that of any nation in Europe, Belgium has seen the most spike in anti-Semitic behavior since October 7. Some of you might remember the attack, the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris a couple years ago, pre-October 7. There was a similar attack on the same day in Belgium, an anti-Semitic attack. Belgians have been charged with crimes of vandalism and religious-based violence in attacks on the Holocaust Museum in both Belgium, Brussels, and Paris. And the Belgian government is really working hard to try to deal with this cancer of anti-Semitism in this nation. As far as I know, Mr. Langenhove is the only individual who has been successfully prosecuted in Belgium for Holocaust denying and inciting violence and reveling in pro-Nazi ideas. And the material that Bill White posted was Mr. Van Langenhove seeking support and donations to help him avoid accountability for his words and actions. Mr. White's work in the past might qualify him to serve in some capacities. I'm not saying there isn't a position, one that doesn't require diplomacy, where his skills might be necessary. But this particular appointment is an insult to Belgium, a nation that is trying to deal with a deep, deep challenge in anti-Semitism. For the United States to send as an ambassador to that nation someone who has platformed the far-right prodigy who's received a prison term for inciting anti-Semitic violence is a slap in the face of this important ally. I started by saying I'm worried that the fact that this nomination is being slid into the middle of a big block of nominations means it won't get the attention that it deserved. Traditionally, on a nomination like this, we might get 1 or 2 hours on the floor to focus on this particular individual. My colleague, Senator Merkley, as we were discussing the change that allowed block nominations, proposed an alternative where you could remove a name from the block if you wanted to actually have some ability to focus on it, and that effort was unsuccessful. But I want to raise this today. This is already getting press in Belgium. The hearing itself, where it came to light that Mr. White was platforming Dries Van Langenhove, is getting press in Belgium. It's getting press elsewhere in Europe, and it's being examined as to, well, wait, how does the U.S. feel about this country and this relationship? How does the U.S. feel about qualifications for diplomats if someone who is so intemperate in his speech, but also is platforming Belgian Holocaust deniers, gets the plum position to be our ambassador to Belgium? And so my hope, and in life I've often learned that high hopes is great, and so is low expectations. And I will say, in standing here today, I stand here with high hopes and low expectations. My hope is that some of my Republican colleagues might look at this and say, this is a bridge too far. This is too important a country, and anti-Semitism is too important an issue to send with the imprimatur of U.S. ambassador into this ally of the United States, somebody who is platforming and promoting an anti-Semitic, Holocaust-denying, convicted criminal. And that is my hope, that when we have this vote later in the week, we might decide that the United States can do better by our ally. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Virginia.
The absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks.
Mr. President,
The senator from Louisiana.
are we in a quorum?
We are.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, hurricane season ends November 30th, 2 months left to go. Last week marked the first anniversary of Hurricane Helene, and I see from reports that the area of North Carolina most affected is still terribly affected. It was such a severe storm that people in Louisiana went from Louisiana to help North Carolina and other states with their emergency operations on the ground. This weekend saw 2 Category 4 storms churning in the western Atlantic. Thankfully, they did not hit, or they do not appear they'll hit our coast. Still, the storms remind people in Louisiana and other states that flooding is not a matter of if, but rather when. Now, Democrats, as we know, are pushing us towards a government shutdown. What does that mean for the National Flood Insurance Program? Imagine you're about to close on a house in 2 days, and the bank requires you to have flood insurance. If you're in a special flood hazard area, by the way, over half of Louisiana is a special flood hazard area, and you're purchasing a house with help from a federally backed loan, you will not be closing on that house, nor will you be able to renew your existing policy. All because Democrats have rejected a clean, continuing resolution to keep the government open. Let me repeat. They are walking away from a bill that simply extends the existing budget for 7 weeks to allow further negotiation. Instead, they demand a highly partisan bill, which would add more than $1 trillion to our nation's debt. They want taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants, transgender surgery for minors, and to cut $50 billion from the Rural Hospital Fund Republicans created as part of our Working Families Tax Cuts bill. Now, back to flood insurance, Americans are left wondering how a shutdown will affect it. While Democrats are writing checks to the far left, folks are wondering if they can close on their house. Now, I'll tell you what the American people care about. They want the government to do its job. They want disaster recovery when needed. They want flood insurance that works. They want rural hospitals to stay open. They want energy security and a balanced budget, not trillion-dollar add-ons that only serve a political agenda. Mr. President, the American people deserve accountability. They expect Congress to put their needs before partisan politics. If this shutdown happens, it means that the National Flood Insurance Program cannot renew policies. That's 500,000 people in Louisiana, millions across the country, unable to renew policies while we're still in hurricane season. It'll mean delays in disaster aid and emergency response coordination. It means uncertainty for families still recovering from Hurricane Helene and other past storms. Now, this is personal for folks in my state. If Democrats would stop trying to please the fringe of their party and start focusing on the real immediate needs of the American people, like keeping the government open, maintaining flood insurance, protecting access to rural health care, we can solve this today. So I ask my fellow senators who are Democrats, who are you working for? Are you working for the American families watching the weather, hoping the next storm doesn't wipe out everything they built? Are you working for veterans waiting on care, the seniors relying on Social Security checks, or the communities who count on rural hospitals in a crisis? Or are you working for political activists and special interest groups that have nothing to do with the lives of the people you were elected to serve? Mr. President, the path forward is simple. Pass a clean bill to keep the government open. Now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the next portion be entered separately into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, middle-class Americans are taking it on the chin. You ask anybody buying groceries, and you start talking about high grocery prices, their heads just start to nod. American farmers can't hire workers to pick their crop. Farm products are being tariffed. Beef and coffee prices are through the roof. For the first time ever seen since it's been tracked, ground beef is over $6 a pound, and it keeps rising. To put that in perspective, it was under $4 when President Trump left office in 2021. And people can't afford to live if you combine the cost of the things they absolutely need, their health care, their flood insurance, property and casualty or homeowners insurance, car insurance, mortgages, car payments. After that, they're sitting around an empty kitchen table worried as to whether there is enough left in their pocketbook to buy the groceries to feed their family. Now, with 67% of Americans saying they're living paycheck to paycheck, you can imagine how many empty kitchen tables there are. Last week, I got a message from a woman in my state who lives on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain. She told me this is the problem she's facing. She can't afford to live and to pay for her groceries. By the way, she's a teacher. Good job. Been for 26 years. But she can't afford to live and pay for groceries. The middle class has taken it on the chin. And a lot of Americans are in the same situation as she is. No matter how hard they work, no matter how many jobs they work, sometimes 2 or 3, they can't keep up. Now, since 2000, housing demand has grown more than housing supply. Roughly 46% of Americans let their credit card payments roll over month to month because they cannot afford to pay in full. That's almost 50% of people in the United States are not paying their credit card bills, and that's with 21% to 26% interest rates on that. Almost a quarter of Americans don't think they will ever pay off their credit card debt. And the hole keeps getting deeper. Now, Republicans are trying to address this. In the Working Families Tax Cuts bill, we increase wages by eliminating taxes on tips and taxes on overtime. Most seniors will not pay taxes on their Social Security payments. We increase the child tax credit. We incentivize companies to start building in the United States now instead of waiting for 10 years. We attract private investment into low-income communities by giving investors a tax break in exchange for developing economically distressed communities. Our goal is to create jobs, better-paying jobs, as we spur this revitalization. We can increase affordable housing for families and workers by expanding and strengthening the low-income housing tax credit, which will help build more than 1.6 million affordable homes nationwide over the next decade. Again, we give tax incentives now for those better-paying manufacturing and construction jobs. We're working to decrease the high cost of health care with, if you will, programs to incentivize the education of more nurses, to lower the cost of prescription drugs, and to lower the cost of health insurance. We have proposed ways to lower the cost of the National Flood Insurance Program, which in my state is one thing that just saps from people's pocketbook. Now, the government shutdown will not help. It creates unnecessary worry, puts a strain on working families, veterans, and folks living on a fixed income. The American middle class has taken it on the chin. Republicans are working to give the American people hope instead of one more body blow. And with that, I yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Well, Mr. President, it looks like we're going to have a shutdown. What does that tell us? I'll tell you what it tells me. It's simply that much more evidence that human evolution is a slow process. I thought humans had advanced more as a species, but apparently we haven't. What do I mean by a shutdown? Well, we can't keep government open without a budget. And tonight at midnight, our current budget expires unless we vote to maintain the status quo and continue the current budget as we negotiate a new one. Many of my Democratic friends say, well, what's the problem? The Republicans are in charge. The president's a Republican, and the Republicans have a majority in the Senate, and the Republicans have a majority in the House. What's the problem? They know what the problem is. We can't pass a budget. We can't keep government open just with Republican votes here in the Senate. We only have 53 Republicans. We need 7 Democrats to join with us. So for my Democratic colleagues to say, well, the Republicans are in charge and they don't need us, they know that's not accurate. And that's what's going on. Now, we've had a few shutdowns before, and every shutdown is different, but most shutdowns are a combination of both policy and politics in varying degrees. This shutdown, in terms of policy, makes absolutely no sense. None. What we have proposed to our Democratic colleagues and the minority leader, Senator Schumer, is to make no changes to the current budget. We just want to continue the current budget and keep government open until just before Thanksgiving to give us more time to negotiate a permanent budget. We did that many times when President Biden was president and when the Democrats had the majority. In fact, we did it 13 times. Not only have Republicans done it, but Democrats have routinely done it. But this time, the Democrats have said, no, 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 no. We want more. And you may be thinking, okay, that's reasonable. What do you want? Well, it's not reasonable. In effect, what the Democrats are saying to us is that we're going to close government unless you Republicans agree to make it bigger. We don't want the status quo. We want you to commit to spending $1.5 trillion more than you're spending now. And we, the Democrats are saying, are going to tell you how to spend it. First, they want us to repeal all of the Medicaid reforms that we did in the reconciliation bill. Some call it the One Big Beautiful Bill. The One Big Beautiful Bill would not reduce Medicaid. In fact, it would go up about 2% every year as a result of our bill. But it would say to people who are on Medicaid, who aren't eligible for Medicaid, that you're not going to get Medicaid anymore. Dual eligibles, people who sign up in Louisiana and Mississippi, that's fraud. Under our bill, they would be thrown off. The Democrats want them put back on. Under our changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill that the Democrats want us to reverse, you would have to satisfy certain income levels to be on Medicaid. The law says if you make too much money, you can't get Medicaid because Medicaid is for the poor. In my state, we have found people through audits making $120,000 a year on Medicaid. So our bill, which the Democrats want us to repeal after just passing it, would say to those people that if you don't meet the income limits, you can't get Medicaid. So that's the first demand of the Democrats. Take out all the reforms that we made to Medicaid in the reconciliation bill and throw them out the window. Number two, they want to extend the Obamacare subsidies. What does that mean? Well, first let me say Obamacare was a mistake, and we know that now. When President Obama passed Obamacare, we were told that our lives would be better. Our lives have been worse. We were told that it would make health insurance more accessible and more affordable. It's done neither. On the non-Medicaid part of Obamacare, we've got, 25 million Americans who are accessing it. And for the most part, about 90% of them are low-income Americans. But the rest are making huge sums of money. Some are making $160,000 a year getting Obamacare subsidized by taxpayers. And that's not the way it was supposed to be. How did we get here? Well, it's simple. During the pandemic, when people were being laid off or losing their jobs or couldn't work, President Biden rammed through a bill to enlarge the subsidies. He took the cap off the amount that you needed to earn in order to get Obamacare. And those subsidies at the end of this year are about to run out. Now, the Republicans have said, we'll sit down with our Democratic friends and talk about how to extend them, but we want to reform the program because it's not right that people making $125,000, $150,000, $250,000, $200,000 a year are getting their health insurance subsidized by the federal government. That's bone deep down to the mayor stupid. But the Democrats, Senator Schumer and his colleagues, have said, no, we will shut government down unless you agree automatically to extend these subsidies, which were passed during the pandemic, after the pandemic is over, permanently. And that's just some of my colleagues' demands. I mean, you need an Excel spreadsheet to be able to follow their demands. Their demands to keep government open, you stack them here, you could stand on them and paint the ceiling. And that's not much of an exaggeration. And when Senator Schumer announced these demands, that's when I knew. I knew it in a nanosecond. We're going to have a shutdown. Because my colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, are very smart people. And Senator Schumer is a smart person. And he knew when he announced these demands that I could tell he wasn't serious. He knew they were unserious. And he knew that neither the president nor the other members of Congress were going to accept them. And you know what? Many Democrats know they're unreasonable as well. So that's why I say the policy part of this makes absolutely no sense. And that's because this isn't about policy. This shutdown is about politics. Now, parties change, just like the human experience changes over time. Political parties change. My party's changing. So is the Democratic Party. And there is a wing of the Democratic Party, I call it the socialist wing. Some less charitable people call it the loon wing of the Democratic Party. And they are in charge right now. And the non-loon, non-socialist Democrats are scared to death of them. And this particular wing of the Democratic Party that's in the ascendancy, what do they believe? They try to out-weird each other all the time. They hate, if you listen to them, they hate Thomas Jefferson. They hate Abraham Lincoln. They hate George Washington. They hate Dr. Seuss. They hate Mr. Potato Head. They think our kids should be able to change genders back and forth at recess. Kids. And if it's their preference, should be able to undergo sex change operations while minors paid by you, the taxpayers. They believe that. They believe in open borders. They believe that if you support the law, which says you have to be vetted to come into our country, if you support the law, you're a racist. I think if you support the law, you're being prudent. But they believe in open borders. And my Democratic friends are about to elect a new mayor in New York City who is a member of the loon wing. He's a self-avowed socialist. He has said if the Prime Minister of Israel comes to New York City, he will have him arrested. But this is not the majority of Democrats that believe this. I don't think that for a second. And I know many of my Democratic colleagues here don't believe that. But the loon wing, the socialist wing, the angry Gary Busey wing of the Democratic Party is in ascendancy, and they've got a lot of power, enormous amount of power. And many of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate are scared of them. And the loon wing is mad at many of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate. They shouldn't be, but they are. And therefore, many of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate are scared of the loon wing. And they want the loon wing to love them. The loon wing will never love them. They're better off doing the right thing, and they know what the right thing to do is. But that's why I say this is a political decision, and that's why we're going to shut government down. Now, once you shut government down, unless you're prepared to leave it shut down permanently, and maybe my Democratic colleagues are, but I don't think so. I still, maybe I'm naive, but I still think too many of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate know better. Once you shut the government down, you got to get back open. How are they going to get it back open? We're not going to agree to their demands. $1.5 trillion. They know we're not going to agree to it. So how is my friend Senator Schumer going to get government back open? You know, there's a famous movie line. I don't remember the movie. I think Denzel Washington said the line. I love Denzel Washington. He's what cool looks like. The guy's awesome. He's a total baller, man. I love Denzel Washington. But anyway, I think he said in one movie, if you pray for rain, you better be prepared to deal with the mud. And truer words were never spoken. So if you want to shut down, I say to my Democratic friends, you better be prepared to deal with the mud. How you going to get it back open? How you going to get it back open? I wouldn't want to be in their shoes to have to make that decision. Let me just say a few words. Every time we do a shutdown, it scares the living daylights out of the American people, especially our elderly. It breaks my heart. All of us get phone calls from folks scared to death. They're not going to get their Social Security check, or they're not going to be able to see their doctor, and it just breaks my heart. So I want to give them a little bit of assurance. During the shutdown, the executive branch will be in charge, and the Trump administration is not going to do anything to hurt our elderly. I want to assure them of that. If you're receiving a Social Security check or Medicare or Medicaid or a veteran's disability, your checks are going to continue. We will make sure of that. Trump administration will make sure of that. Government may be shut down, but essential workers will still be there to make sure those checks are sent out. If you're hungry and you don't have the money to eat, we're not going to let you starve to death. The administration is going to continue payments. We call it, some people call it SNAP. I call it food stamps. And we will continue the payments for the women, infants, and children's program. Most of us refer that to WIC. You'll still get your mail. Don't worry about that. Postal Service will be working through the shutdown. If you depend for health care on your Veterans Administration and VA medical centers, they're going to remain open. So I don't want you to be scared about that. Now, you're going to notice an impact. Probably we've got 2.5 million federal employees. Probably 750,000 aren't going to be on the job. Under the law, they have to go home. So you will notice an impact. You'll notice it in our parks. You'll notice it in our museums here in Washington if you're visiting. You'll notice it in many of the federal agencies. That's the law. They can't come to work in a shutdown. Doesn't matter who initiates the shutdown. We still got a little time. It's midnight tonight, and we're going to be taking some votes here in a few minutes. Give our Democratic colleagues one last chance. One last chance to do the right thing. And I certainly hope they accept it. With that, Mr. President, Appreciate your patience, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Right now. Let's be clear about that because it underscores why addressing healthcare is so urgent. The reason we need to start this conversation right now is because people will receive letters in the mail with their new rates next month. In Idaho, open enrollment will begin October 15th. And we already know those rates are going to be much higher if Republicans insist on inaction. We already know millions of people are going to start losing their insurance. They'll be priced out if we don't get this dealt with soon. It is worth noting that according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, a quarter of our farmers and ranchers are enrolled through the healthcare marketplace. And nearly 1/2 of marketplace enrollees are small business owners, small business workers, or self-employed. Why do Republicans want to price farmers out of healthcare? Why don't they care about small businesses and their workers? I heard about one family in my home state of Washington who learned that if Republicans get their way on this, their health care premium could jump from $278 a month to as much as $1,800 a month. And they are far from alone in staring down a huge, huge health care increase if Republicans refuse to act now. Millions of families are going to see their health care costs jump by thousands of dollars. That, Mr. President, is why we have to act. That is why Democrats want to avoid. That's what we want to avoid. And we know we have to do this now. But still, Republican leadership has refused to start that conversation. Meanwhile, Democrats are at the table. We have ideas ready to go. Democrats put forward our proposal for funding the government, not as Republicans are pretending as a take it or leave it demand, but a proposal. One with several key issues we want to discuss with Republicans. We want to talk about how we stop Republicans' Medicaid cuts before our families get kicked off their health care and before Republicans' cuts shutter many of our rural hospitals. We want to talk about how we can stop Russ Vought from stealing money for cancer research. And we want to talk about how we save the healthcare tax credits that tens of millions depend on before those higher premiums kick in and get locked in, before families decide they just can't afford this coverage, in short, before it's too late. Because if Republicans insist on sitting on their hands, if they decide to wait until the last minute to finally work with us to save these credits, 1.5 million Americans will lose their health care. Again, that is if we do pass an extension at the last minute. If Republicans never get serious about this at all, it is going to be even worse. But even delay has a real cost here, one that is paid for by our families. So it's time for Republicans to get serious. Despite what Republicans are pretending, Democrats are not asking for the moon here. We are literally just insisting that Congress take action to address the looming health care crisis that they themselves caused. It is shocking that Republican leaders are digging in so deep against this now. If nothing changes, that is a pretty ominous sign. I hope, despite the completely partisan path Republicans are on right now, they will come to their senses and come to the table. Because I don't just want us to keep the government open with a deal brokered by both sides. I want to stop the enormous price increase that's about to hit our families. And I want us to ultimately get those full funding year bills that help people. I want those to get signed into law. So, Mr. President, here we are. And I have to say right now, what we see is revote trying to hold government workers hostage. Right now, we have House Republicans refusing to even come back here to DDC to do their jobs until next week. Right now, we have Senate Republicans replaying a failed vote. Look, if Republicans want to avoid a shutdown, like Democrats want to avoid a shutdown, then stop spending so much time saying you will sit down with us on health care later. Spend that time working with us right now. But if Republicans insist on writing a bill without any Democrats, they better pass it without Democrats too, because I'm a no. Democrats will continue to work to keep government open and to save your health care. I'm ready to keep the government open, as I said many times over the last several weeks, and I'm ready and I'm willing to stay at the table for as long as it takes. The question here remains, will Republican leadership get serious and negotiate? Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
When we talked to the president yesterday, he didn't understand this, but I know that the leader does. On October 1st, in a day or two, millions of Americans, millions, are going to get notices that their insurance premiums will rise an average of $400 a month, $5,000 a year. A middle-class family can't afford that. We want to renew those credits, among other things in health care, but renew those credits so that people won't pay that horrible increase. You can debate health care all you want, but the overwhelming majority of Americans, Democrat, Independent, and even a good number of Republicans, want us to renew those credits. And the impoundment rescission, I mean, what does the leader think? that we should go along, come to an agreement, and then let them undo it unilaterally as they've done once and now have asked to do it more? No way. That's not how you deal with this, and we never had another president